Beatitudes Persecution. Let's talk about it. Jesus. Coffee. Yes, a hoodie morning. Cold out there this morning. I was up at God early to take Leah and Lauren to the airport. Trip to California for 11 days. So I want to go over, I went through the Beatitudes last week, kind of broke off of that yesterday and Monday. But I want to go back into the tail end. Good morning, 6. I want to go back into the tail end of the Beatitudes and finish and wrap the Beatitudes, because I feel this is so important in today's world that we understand that. And I've encountered this myself. When we step out boldly in our faith, we're going to encounter persecution. We will. Good morning, Felipe. We'll encounter persecution. So I want to go through these two verses, verses 10 and 11, and 12. And then I want to go into a cross-reference verse that talks a lot about what Jesus says in verse 12. So I want to go through verses 10 through 12 first in Matthew 5, and then I want to go to John 16. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. So, right? So, persecution, it happens, right? And then he goes on to say, blessed are you when they revile and persecute you and say all kinds of evil against you falsely for my sake. Rejoice and be exceedingly glad. Really glad that I'm getting persecuted, and glad that I'm getting picked on, and glad that I'm getting name called, and glad that yes, it's exactly what he says. Rejoice. And we know that he says in 1 Thessalonians 5, verse 16, rejoice always. He's emphasizing it here. Even in persecution, rejoice. And be exceedingly, not just glad, exceedingly glad. Like overjoyed. For great is your reward in heaven. For so they persecuted the prophets who were before you. So those that came long before us were persecuted. Matter of fact, we know that they all got killed for their faith. They all got martyred for their faith. And many, many, many others afterwards have been martyred for their faith. So, if you're put to the test, and you're standing in the fires of this world, and they're going to end your life if you don't denounce Jesus, what would you do? That's the absolute extreme. But it could happen, and it does happen. I've faced persecution at my previous employer, and I didn't hide that even when I worked for them. I was come to many times saying, you can't talk about religion at work. You can't talk about religion at work. I tell people, I'm not talking about religion. I just have the best friend ever. And I want to share my best friend with everybody. My best friend went to the cross for me. My best friend wrote a check that I could never afford. Covered a debt that I couldn't cover. He wrote that check with his blood and said, It is finished. Your debt's paid. He did that for me. How can I not share him with the world? Right? Like, he's my best friend. He's my dad. I get to crawl in his lap when things get really hard or when things are really good. I get to climb in his lap and say, "You're the best father ever. Thank you for adopting me. Thank you for adopting me so I'm no longer a son of disobedience, but I'm a child of God." Yesterday we talked about all the things that only God can do. It's far from an exhaustive list. Only God can turn the sea into a highway. When he opened up the Red Sea, turned the sea into a highway. Took the ocean and made it I-95. Only he could do that. And then turn it back into a sea when he needed to. Only God could lead the people of Egypt, or lead the people of Israel out of Egypt and guide them with pillars of fire at night and pillars of smoke during the day. Only God could do that. So, yes, so we will face persecution. But I want you to hear what he says in John 16:33. Because this is such a comforting passage when we go through hard times and we go through troubles. Jesus says, "These things I have spoken to you, that in me you may have peace. In the world you will have tribulation, but be of good cheer. I have overcome the world." Be of good cheer. I have overcome the world. And we know that what Paul says in Philippians 4:13, when he talks about having abundance or being in a shortage, whatever he's going through, he can do all things through Christ who gives him strength. He doesn't talk about he can go out and flip a car. He's talking about if he has an abundance of wealth or if he's in poverty. If he has an abundance of food or he's in a shortage. He can overcome because he can do all things through Christ who strengthens us. You can do all things through Christ who strengthens you. You can go through any tribulation, any hard time, any trouble, any persecution, anything you face. When you stop looking inward and start looking upward. When things get hard, we need to lift our eyes to the cross. And we need to look above the waves. One of my favorite Hillsong songs is Oceans. Keep my eyes above the waves. Doesn't matter how rough the waters are. We know that only God can talk to the waters and talk to a storm and calm it. It's the same thing he does for us. When we're in a storm and we have a storm raging, he can tell it to quiet. He can tell it to cease. And it'll cease. Through his blood, through his power, through his name, he can quell all of that. So know that when you're going through any persecution, don't back down. You have Christ behind you, and he has overcome the world. Through him we have peace. Peace that surpasses all understanding. As we know in Philippians 4, verse 7. So, I love you guys. I know he loves you like crazy. So know that in persecution, you're good. God's got you. So, What a great way to wrap the Beatitudes, right? All the characteristics of a Christ follower, and how does he wrap them? He wraps it all up and puts a bow on it with, when you face persecution, know that the prophets before you overcame it, but you have peace in me. Yours is the kingdom of heaven. When you're persecuted, rejoice and be exceedingly glad, because your reward in heaven will be great. So, he loves you like crazy, guys. So much. Good morning, Jerry. So we'll move over the next couple days through some of the parts of the Sermon on the Mount that I just love and are so good to know and hold on to in today, in the world we live in today. So, I'm going to be solo for 11 days. My mermaid's out in California. She's on the other coast. I dropped them off the airport stupidly early this morning. So, I love you guys. He loves you like crazy. We'll be back tomorrow with whatever Dad wants to talk about. Love you guys.